Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Girard.
10 days is the optimal time to bring an interview process to a successful outcome. The way to achieve this is to tighten timelines from stage to stage and cut down the number of people involved in the process. Now, I know what you're thinking, that more people should be involved, which is incorrect. The reason why we involve more people in the interview process is because we value their opinion or input on the individual. But opinion has no value when it comes to making a hiring decision. And opinion is what you get when your interview questions are not tied to gathering evidence. Opinion breeds assumptions, bias, and personal motives, which do not serve the growth of the business. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and executives win the strongest hires. We do so by sharing insights from top-performing rebel entrepreneurs, game changers, and industry leaders like our guest today, Nick Livingston. Now, Nick is the co-founder and CEO of Honeit Software. So Nick is formerly the head of recruiting at TubeMobile, and him and his team scaled the company from 60 to 300 employees, or 360 employees, through a successful IPO in just 26 months. In the same 2 years, he attended business school at UC Berkeley, started a family, has 3 daughters, co-founded Honeit Software, which is an all-in-one interview platform designed by recruiters to schedule, record, transcribe, search, and share interview answers for quick collaboration and higher quality hiring, which is what makes Nick the perfect expert for today's topic. Nick, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Thanks, Rick. Happy to be here.
Pleasure to have you, my friend. All right, so we're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to talk about, first off, why anything more than 3 interviews is too much. That's my opinion. You can share your opinion as well. And then how to interview and hire in 3 meetings. Sound like a plan?
I love it. Yeah, it's an audacious goal, right? It almost sounds unbelievable, but I think it's
That's
fun.
our BHAG, right? That's our BHAG for today's episode. All right, we're pulling in EO references. Yay. Or actually, that's Jim Collins, isn't it? I forgot who did the BHAG. So anyway, I digress. So let's get into a little bit about some of the challenges today that you're seeing from the perspective of hiring. I think when we had a conversation, you had shared with me that you've got some companies that want to bring 8-10 people into an interview process. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, in today's market especially, right, candidate-driven market, it's hot, candidates have options. That's always been the case. We've always felt that kind of the interview and hiring process is a two-way conversation, right? Candidates are interviewing you. Yep. Well, when there are more jobs than active candidates, which is definitely the case today, candidates have options. And if you're going to ask, if you need them to meet 8 to 10 people in your organization to feel comfortable to make a decision, they're going to take a job at your competitor, right? They're going to say, this is how the company operates. This is too much red tape. I'm not going to be able to get anything done. I think your interview and hiring experience is a perfect peek into how business gets done, right? Yep. And if it's not efficient, if it doesn't make sense, if it's redundant, if you have people on the phone or doing video calls who don't know what they're talking about, asking the same questions, that's a bad candidate experience, right?
Wait, you mean you should be asking the same questions from 4 different people?
Oh my gosh. Well, most companies wouldn't even know if that's happening, right? Because
they don't.
We're not capturing interview information or content, right? So we don't know what happens in interviews.
Yeah, that's the big question that I kind of always pose, is that 2 people walk into a room for an interview, what happens next? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what goes on in that interaction most of the time. And what happens is that decision usually is made by the the interviewer within 5 to 10 minutes. And then the rest of the whole 45 minutes to an hour is consumed by digging holes and poking reasons why or why not to hire the person.
Yeah, the best case scenario, you get some typed notes that are that person's interpretation or their explanation of what someone said about a topic.
Yeah, it's always an interpretation, though. That's the problem.
It's an interpretation, right? And then the worst case scenario, you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down and says, not a fit. And you're like, wait a minute, you just invested 45 minutes of the business's time and money to talk to this person, and the output is,
Well, I think the worst case scenario is when they come out of the interview and they're like, I don't really know.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we talk to some more candidates, or like they spent
Yeah.
45
3 out of 5 stars, 3 out of 5 stars, right in the middle. Like, let's not go either way. I'm going to hedge my bets and just
Exactly. Well, that's if you're using scorecards, right?
Right.
And those are completely subjective. I mean, I don't know what transpired. And yes, you trust your people to make the right decisions, but at the same time, can they really be trusted when there's no North Star or anything that that keeps them headed in the right direction?
It's true. I joined an early stage startup in Emeryville, California, outside of San Francisco. So location was a disadvantage. We were building ad technology, which was fascinating, but it was complex and hard to explain and things like that. So kind of everything was stacked against us. But it was interesting because, when I joined, the founders were doing the first interviews, right? Like at an early stage company, it's the founder, the co-founders who are having that first call. They know what they're looking for. They know the culture and core values that they're going for. But as a company scales, you start hiring managers and directors and VPs and the C-suite. And maybe your best, brightest interviewers are pushed to the end of the process, right? And we kind of experienced this firsthand where you start hiring recruiters to take the first call. You start hiring mid-level managers to be the interviewers. Maybe they don't have any experience in that. And then, it was interesting. You get to Brett and John, who were amazing interviewers and knew it when they heard it. But we'd already spent 4 hours talking to candidates before they could quickly say, not a fit, right? And it had us kind of think about all this time and effort that goes into the interview process. I mean, some companies, it looks and feels like an enterprise sales cycle, right? It takes 5 hours of meetings.
It feels like a really long transactional sales cycle because you're not enterprise sales. At least you're going deep and you're understanding the problems first before you provide the solution, right? Whereas like I've always felt that most recruiting processes are completely transactional where, I mean, I've had founders. It's good that you had founders that you worked with that knew how to interview. I've had founders that have walked out of meetings and said, yeah, let's just hire them. We talked about baseball for 45 minutes and we have a lot in common. I'm like, that's the worst reason to hire somebody though.
Yeah. And you don't know what's happening. I mean, we, even at TubeMogul, our team kind of put together this, it came from Brett, said, we want to get everybody trained on interviewing, right? We put together a manual. Every hiring manager, interview panelist had to participate, which I think was great. Came from the top. So everybody did it.
Yep.
But then even then, you still don't have any visibility or accountability into what's happening during all of these hours and hours and hours and hours of interview conversations, right? And it's like, you don't know, are we asking the right questions about core values? Are we asking the right technical questions for any given role? Are we able to ask strategic interview questions at the first step of the process to understand someone's knowledge of the industry? And, it's like, are they asking bad questions? Are they asking illegal questions, right? Are they asking about race or religion on the first phone screen? We don't know, right? But wouldn't it be great if we did? So we could either catch bad actors or correct and train, interviewers.
Well, it's a good thing you have an answer for that. All right, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I'm your host, Rick Girard. And for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsors. Hey, check out stridesearch.com. There you'll find a link to healing career wounds. Let it be your company's secret weapon to landing the strongest talent. Our guest today is Nick Livingston, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Hone It. And we're talking about really the interview process right now and how to hone it down into smaller segments or a much more effective process so that you're not wasting a whole bunch of time and getting into the process and being like, I don't know. To me, that's God, that was the one answer that I couldn't. Yes or no is great because you have some sort of you have an answer, but I don't know is like keep people in limbo. It's so that kills candidate experience.
Yeah, and that's where it gets wishy-washy, and we can't respond to a candidate because we aren't sure what the decision is, right? That's where the black hole happens, right? And everybody talks about the black hole. It's from the, it's like give them a fast no, right? People appreciate a fast no. They can prioritize their job search and focus on the 3 companies that are interested rather than waiting. It's timing. Timing is everything on both sides, right? The job seeker's perspective and the companies.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's talk about why this is important to a company. So why should they have a process that kind of hones it down into, you know, as I call it, 3 interviews or so?
I think there's a lot of things to talk about here. The head of executive recruiting at Whole Foods Market, Andres Traslavina, loves using Hone It because it keeps the process fair and consistent, right? Like, I just structured interviews are fair, right? And I think we talk about, if you don't have visibility or accountability or transparency into that, you don't know if interviews are structured and fair. So I think the first step is like, let's think about what questions we should be asking a candidate that might reflect core values across the company, right? We could ask a junior marketing coordinator this question and understand if they reflect these competencies. We could ask a VP of sales the same question and hear maybe a different answer, but also potentially figure out if they're right for this organization, right? Like, so thinking about just interview questions and interview content, I think is the first
Well,
step.
I'm a huge believer that interview questions should be fed to the interviewer. Let's cut out the ambiguity. Let's cut out the margin of error. Let's cut out the ability to sway my decision either way. If everybody's asking the same question the same time, like the same simple questions and delving deeper into those questions, then it provides, like you said, a fair interview. But number two, you're also getting tons of evidence to support whether or not that person should be hired.
Yeah, I mean, I think step one to try to simplify or improve the process is just to start to think of interviews as business conversations, right? We can look at support calls that have been recorded for decades. Why? Quality control, training, better customer experience, right? On the
Yep.
support side of things, you can look at sales calls over the last 5 to 10 years. Companies are recording sales calls. Why? Because they can share interesting anecdotes and tips and raise the ship, right? Everybody can do a better sales job and make more money and win, right?
Nick, that was a really smooth segue into how we do it. So this, I love it. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to solve the problem, right? So like you just brought up interview conversations as business intelligence. What does that mean exactly?
I mean, when you ask somebody a question, there's usually a good versus great answer behind that question. What are we doing with the answers, right? So, I mean, I think just interview content, it's where companies learn about other interesting things that competitors are doing, right? If you hire a marketing manager from the competition and you ask them, hey, tell me about a time you solved an interesting problem or a creative marketing campaign, they're going to give you a really great answer. Well,
Or they'll give you a really bad answer.
or a
But
bad answer. But either way, that you could call that business intelligence.
yeah. Well, and not only that, you're getting to the truth. I think that's the most important piece of the interview is you want to get to the truth of who that person is across the desk. And same for them. They want to get to the truth of who you are. So the other thing that's an interesting byproduct of this competitive intelligence is that, let's say you are recruiting people and you get somebody from XYZ company, they tell you all the internal problems that are happening at the company, their competitor, because they sing like birds most of the time when you start talking to them.
Definitely.
Now that just opens up the door for now I've got another another avenue of which I can recruit out of.
I mean, the talent
Nick, I lost your
landscape.
volume there.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Oh, all right. We lost Nick's volume. I hate when that happens. We're going to take him off and we're going to just restart him. So the competitive intelligence, giving somebody the ability to understand, actually to giving yourself the ability to understand what's happening to your competitors, super invaluable. And then taking that information and being able to utilize that in such a way, hand it off to somebody who does recruiting or reach out to other people in the organization that could reach out to that person, to the people at those organizations, and enable you to gather more candidate flow. All right, let's see if we got Nick back. We got you back, Nick?
Okay, sorry about that. I just refreshed.
Oh, no, I can't hear you. All right, we're going to take a quick break so you can reset the mixer. We'll be right back. Hold on, Nick.
Okay. You do a little dance.
Oh, we got him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was doing a little dance just to keep, myself
Entertain
entertained.
the crowd. Okay.
Nobody knows. Okay.
Where were we?
All right. So we got off the interview, business intelligence. And now we're talking about the next one, I think, which was interview structure.
Yeah. And I think what goes with it, we can formulate some really good questions and we can figure out what are those core value questions to ask? What are those technical questions we want to ask? What are the strategic questions we want to ask? Then I think the challenge with the interview process has always been, well, okay, we can ask great questions, but how can we share answers? Or how can we figure out what a good versus great answer is to any given question, specific to our company, specific to this department, or specific to this team, right? There's micro cultures and maybe best interview answers at the team level. So it gets very interesting very quick when you start to not only look at the questions, but what makes a good versus great answer.
Yeah. Well, or a bad answer, right? Because, I think with behavioral interview questions, you can certainly dig underneath the hood and really like test people's answers and really get down to the nitty gritty of really what happened. You start to see a lot of, with some people, you see the inconsistencies pop out. And that's really what the interview is about, is to understand, okay, is this person who's across the desk, do they really do what they're telling me they do? Or is it, just at a surface level?
Exactly. I think I think that challenge is most visible at the top of the funnel. Let's call it a recruiter phone screen, right? Where you put some person into the flow who hasn't been a QA automation engineer or hasn't been a web analytics manager or hasn't been a cost accountant. And we're putting them at the front of the process to ask questions about cost accounting or marketing analytics or QA automation, right? And they're the middle person between what a hiring manager is looking for and what a candidate's seeking. And just there's this inherent misinterpretation and miscommunication that goes both directions, right? Hiring manager explains a job to a recruiter who then tries to explain that need or opportunity to a candidate. Same thing. Candidate explains some answer to a recruiter who hears it, then tries to, share notes or what the candidate said back to the hiring manager. And there's just this, it's most glaring there when you think about putting people in the process who may not be marketing practitioners, right? Or technical.
So I'm going to say something totally wildly unpopular. I think doing these technical phone screens in the very beginning after the recruiter talks to the person are just a big waste of time. Most of the time, they don't really gather any data to support anything. But I think the recruiter can gather that data more impactfully for the hiring managers, so it could just move straight to an interview process. Again, cutting out all these extra steps. Doing a technical phone screen, great. But if I'm as a recruiter, if I can gather data to support, like, hey, this person is the person who built X, Y, and Z, and their portion of that product was they identified this, that, and the other thing. And then, they walked me through the complete steps of how they built something or how they completed like a really hard project or how they gained recognition from the company. Those are the things that are most impactful that can skip all that, right? Get you to the point where you don't have to deal with it.
I think so. And I think we can kind of compartmentalize, let's say, recent computer science graduates, right? Like, okay, maybe you want to send them a coding test or tech them out. But again, if you're talking about senior engineers or architects or engineering managers, like giving them a coding test that a recent college grad or a boot camp JavaScript graduate could complete isn't probably the right thing to do, right? And I think
that, like, senior people can't complete them because they haven't done that. They're like, it's fresh out of school.
Yeah, that's kind of where Honeit came from originally. My co-founders are both awesome technical engineers, and they were asking, why is this recruiter asking me to rate myself on Java from 1 to 10? Or what, like, right? Or doing that.
I don't know what else to ask.
Yeah. So I think you're right. And I think that's what we're excited to see. We're starting to see recruiters on the first phone call ask the 2 key core value questions, 3 or 4 technical questions. And I use the term technical loosely, right? But I mean, could be a marketing framework question. It could be about how did you solve this problem in finance, right? But they're able to ask now these like in-depth rec specific questions and share those insights, right? Like let's go a little deeper, right?
All right. So just to recap on the interview structure, we have core values questions, questions related to the need, the skills, whatever they're looking for. And then what would be and then who's asking like a good answer versus a great answer or a bad answer.
Yeah, I think just the idea of the interviews as content, right? There's
Yeah.
questions, there's answers, there's insights that we historically haven't really captured or shared.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to point out here is that you don't want it based on opinion, like your opinion of how you interpreted the answer. It should be really more factual.
I think that's where bias actually comes from.
Yeah.
Bias isn't what the candidate said, right? Bias is I heard something, I'm going to make a snap judgment based on my limited knowledge of subject matter X, and then type a sentence to someone else explaining, like it's that communication piece that's where the bias kicks in, right? If you can remove that person's opinion from the process, we can essentially remove bias from the interview.
And you know where this is really detrimental to a company that I've seen is when you have a person in the interview process who's probably not their top performer, like maybe a B or a C player, and they interview an A player. And because they're trying to protect their position, they make a jump assumption and they automatically revert to, this is not a person we need to hire. So rather than elevating themselves, we're going the other way.
Yeah, and I think also we
lost you again. Your audio. All right, I'm gonna shoot. Nick, it's not on your end. I think it's on our board end. So I'm gonna reset again. Dance time. I got you, Nick. Nope. Oh, you're on mute, dude. Unmute your mic.
There we go.
Oh, there you go. All right. So what's after interview structure?
I think that's when we get to this idea of interview data, right? If we capture all the great insights from a conversation, we can slice and dice it, we can search it, and we can share it, right? So this idea that interviews are content or interview data, I think is where we kind of go next. And that when we start to think of, sharing someone's answers, again, nobody wants to listen to the entire interview. Like we've seen that at time to time. And I've actually was talking to someone who, worked at Google a long time ago. And it sounds like they piloted this where they recorded a 45-minute interview and shared that 45-minute interview with someone else. And, amazingly, they didn't want to listen to a 45-minute interview that someone else conducted.
Nobody does.
Who would want to do that, right?
Yeah.
Same thing we hear sometimes is like, oh, I'm going to share the transcript of a 45-minute interview for someone else to read. And I said, that's even worse. Who wants to read a 45-minute transcript of another interview? So,
especially with all the ums and and ahas and, all the fluff words that are in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so the idea is like, how do we parse down an interview into just kind of the information that can be easily consumed and shared with someone else? And we like to think of that as interview collaboration, right? Collaboration is obviously a very popular business term, but we haven't been able to see that in terms of a recruiting or interview experience because we haven't been capturing answers. Well, once you start to think of interviews as data, one person can ask the great question, another person can assess the great answer. And we start to look at, do we need 8 separate people having 8 separate 45-minute conversations for 8 people to be involved in the hiring process or interview experience?
No, but I hope that some companies continue that process. Because startups, no, for sure, you do not need it.
Yeah, competitive advantage if we don't do that. Let them continue doing that and putting 3 out of 5s on their scorecard and black holes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. If you're a startup, it should be thumbs up, thumbs down. There's no reason for a scorecard. if you're a 3 out of 5, you didn't gather enough evidence to support whether or not you can make a decision, yes or no.
Yeah, and I think as the more people you get involved with the interview experience, the less accountability the hiring manager has for the hire, right? I think that's the other thing we quickly see. If the onus is on the hire to say yes or no, and I'm going to train this person and teach them, and I see it, and you don't trust me, I'll prove it to you. That's what you want a hiring manager to do. You want them to take that person under their wing and train them and onboard them and get them up to speed to show people you're made a great hire.
Yeah.
If you get 7 or 8 other people who say yes, no, me, you're going to, 1, lose interest in fighting for it. And 2, even if you do hire it, it's not going to be your hire, right? It's going to be decision by committee, right?
Yeah. So the key to this is recording the interview, and then secondarily taking notes on the interview too, so that you can actually include those notes with your assessment, right? So you can, you're essentially, you have an accountability that's inherent here because you're held to what the recording said. If somebody does listen to it and fact check you, they can find where the faults are. But knowing that you're recorded, you're going to take better notes, and you're going to make sure that you're being less biased. You're being more objective as to whether or not this person can thrive and do well in the organization.
I think that's right. I think the other angle that we haven't really talked about too is back to competitive talent market. If you hear an amazing candidate who's active, right? When do we switch to selling versus assessing, right? Like, so we talk to a lot of recruiters in San Francisco Bay Area. They talk to a great engineer. They're saying, how do we make an offer? How do we get our SVP of engineering on the phone with this software engineer, right? Instead of 5 extra steps, when can we bring in the big guns to start selling this candidate after 1 call, right? Instead of waiting to interview number 6 to have the SVP, close them, right?
Yeah.
So I think this also becomes collaboration of, like, you talk to a great candidate. How can we make sure that's clear, and that's your most executive stakeholders might be willing to jump in and take a call on the second call.
That's the discovery call. I mean, that's where trust comes into play. You've got to have that relationship with the SVP or the VP to be able to say, hey, look, I've got a guy you need to talk to, and you've got to trust me on this one. I think that's one of the biggest complaints I hear from recruiters is that, I send somebody over and it's crickets for a few days, and then it's hurry up and let's get this person in, and, jump through these hoops and all these hurdles.
It's CYA. It's built to cover your ass, right? Most of the interview experience is like the CYA process, right? Versus built for a great candidate, get them through faster. Like, let's accelerate offers.
Sure.
Let's win.
And that has a lot to do with the recruiter setting the expectations for the hiring manager or, the team. Hey, look, I'm not going to provide you 15 people to make 1 hire. I'm going to provide you 2, maybe 3, and you're going to make this hire, so that you're doing most of the filtering on your side, intelligent filtering, and then feeding off people that have a really good chance of getting hired.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, in a perfect scenario, I imagine this amazing cooperative or collaborative relationship between recruiter and hiring manager, where you can do 2 calls, a great phone screen, and a great expert phone interview with the hiring manager. Share some information with a couple of stakeholders, but make a decision, right? Yeah. And we can get this down to 2 or 3 interviews, right?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we do it all the time. We do it all the time with a lot of our clients. We've got the discovery call and then 3 interviews and done. And usually the person who makes it through those 3 interviews and they're done pretty quickly, they're 45 minutes. And essentially, well, with the exception of a working session, which is the skills assessment, we make that a little bit longer. It's usually about 2 hours. But taking those 2 and just breaking them down, and when you get to the 3rd person, you're already prepping for the person for the offer. And the person saying, I want to work here because I see the value in working here.
2 or 3 calls, that's down to a week. I mean, you can make an offer in a week, right? Like,
totally.
But
you want to give yourself a little time. So say 10 days, 2 weeks.
Sure. I like how you give a little cushion, 10 business days.
You have to have a little cushion because, sometimes it's hard to schedule people.
Yeah, just availability. Yeah, but again, when you start to simplify the number of 8 people, it's like a lot of these tools we're seeing, it's like, oh, I need to schedule 8 people, I need a tool to help me schedule and arrange a calendar for like 8 or 9 people. You're like, ugh, like
That's ridiculous.
it's like called building the technology for a problem around a problem.
Yeah, you should put more hurdles up. All right, shoot, Nick, we're getting pretty close on time. What would be 2 or 3 key takeaways you can give the audience so they can plug into their business today?
I would say start to think of interviews as business conversations, take them serious, right? And start to recognize that the interviews are content, right? And if you start to think of it as content, you can start to think, wow, I could search it, I could share it, I could analyze it. So just interviews are business conversations. The other thing I think we're excited about is the idea, interview collaboration, right? If a quick and efficient process doesn't require this series interview experience that we've seen for decades, right? A series of conversations. It could be one great call, share some highlights with the team to make a faster decision together. So this idea of interview collaboration would probably be the top 2.
All right, I love it. Nick, thanks so much for your time investment today. And I want to welcome you back again to the Higher Power Radio community. I think the last time you did this show was like 4 years ago, so it's been a while.
Right.
So now what would be the best way in which members of the audience can find Honeit, find you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, honeit.com, honeit.com. I'm at nick@honeit.com. We offer free trials. It's a really powerful tool, combines scheduling, recording, transcription, and the ability to share interview insights with your team.
And I will vouch for it because we use it, which is how we always connected. We use it as well. And as a matter of fact, we have a lot of our clients that are running it. So I love what you guys are doing. So, all right. Well, I want to thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Higher Power. Quick thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Gerard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share after all this shows for you. So we want to continue to be able to bring valuable content every week. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at Hire, H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, radio, R-A-D-I-O.com, or you can drop me an email at rick@stridesearch.com. Tune in next week. We're going to actually break down the discovery call. So I've had a lot of requests on how to break down the discovery call, and this is the one thing you can change right now to ensure that to solve the problem for ghosted interviews. I'm your host, Rick Gerard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon, or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to recruitment success, Rick Gerard.